Hello, I'm Livi, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to Lost with Fblthp, Episode 1, the very beginning of our journey. I'm really looking forward to exploring all sorts of unusual aspects of Magic the Gathering together, starting with making every game of Commander fun. So I've been playing Magic since original Mirrodin block, and I've been playing Commander for many years as well. But I have had all sorts of unfun experiences playing this fantastic game somehow. Mostly when I have gone to my LGS and just had some mismatched expectations, sort of a thing. So we're going to talk about how to navigate that. So every day I'm online reading about Magic, because that is what I literally do every single day. And I read about people that are struggling to have fun with Commander. And it's just a head scratcher, right? Because it's such a fun game. But people are very, very different. There's a whole lot of different personality types out there, and it can be kind of tricky to make sure that everyone has fun. So what's the deal? Why are we playing Commander in the first place, right? It's a fun game, except when it isn't. So why do we play any game, right? It's to have fun, except when it's about something different. So I'm thinking about like competitive games, right? Is that always about fun? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's just about fulfillment. So my idea of games is that they're an activity or a contest. So there's a slight distinction there, right? So you could say that all contests are activities, I guess, but I'm thinking more about it being like this pleasurable social activity together versus pure competition. And the two are not mutually exclusive by any means. But how are we approaching the game? Are we approaching it as more of a social activity, contest, or a mixture of both? So my background as a professional musician has meant that I have participated in a whole lot of professional competitions, right? Just playing for money and preparing for those experiences. And it's sort of a game, I guess, right? It's kind of like a sport where you're training and hoping to get some cash out of it. But I found that competition and fun are not always going hand in hand. So I also did some competitive fighting games for a while, and I can tell you I had a lot more fun playing that game when it was just with friends for fun at a really high level than playing for money. But there is this idea of fulfillment versus fun that we can get out of games, right? So when I play Dungeons and Dragons, I have a whole lot of fun being with my friends, and I have fulfillment when we're crafting a really interesting story together, when I have this cool creative outlet. When I play chess, it's fun to make cool plays, but I just find it very fulfilling to get better at that game. So let's circle back to Commander here. That's what we're talking about, right? So what in particular makes Commander unfun? This is going to vary incredibly from person to person, but I found that in general, for me and the people I play with, and a lot of people online, anything that increases downtime, especially asymmetrically, right? So we're thinking about stacks and that kind of thing. And I'm the first person to say that if we get through the turn cycle quickly, I'm totally cool with stacks. If the game is moving along pretty quickly, I'll start to have some choices to make again. I'm into that. I mean, if it's stacks where I truly am locked out of the game, maybe less so, but I'm also thinking of like chaos effects, right? Warp World or whatever, where it's like, all of a sudden, you're spending 5 or 10 minutes just resolving this single effect that is doing all of this wild stuff. I find that's why a lot of people don't like those effects, right? It might be fun once, but if it's significantly eating into your time where you're able to participate in the game, not so much fun. And there's this feeling of fairness. So when the stacks player or the storm player or whatever is taking a 20-minute turn, and then everybody else goes around and takes their 2-minute turn, it doesn't feel particularly fair, right? And sometimes removal can feel that way also. Someone plays a board wipe and they get a 20 for one, right? But I think board wipes, help us all play fair Magic. They keep a lot of strategies in check, and they're just more of a accepted part of the game. Mass land destruction, though, watch out. Okay, so Commander is so interesting to me because it is a social game. You need to have people to play with. Of course, this past year, that's been a little harder, have not been able to play in person so much. And so that means we're playing more with strangers sometimes, or we're playing in these online spaces. And that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting way that the community is growing. But there's a whole lot of baggage there when you're playing with people you don't know, right? Like how balanced are your decks going to be? What is everyone's idea of fun? That's all really challenging to approach, especially with people you are not sure if you're like safe around, sort of, you're not sure if you can be vulnerable with. But anyway, for the moment, let's focus on cultivating a long-term play group. So you've played with some people, you get along well. How do we make sure we all have a good time? So a really important point, maybe the most important point so far, is that if the people you play with never have fun, they won't want to play with you. If they even only have fun 10% of the time, right, they're not going to want to play with you usually. There's some people that might suffer along in their play group and have like a little bit of fun, but, are just not having the greatest time. But you will absolutely have a much better time altogether if everyone is having fun most of the time. If you're just pup stomping the table all the time, everyone you're playing with might not have so much fun. And so it doesn't feel fair to them. That's similar to my experience when I first started going to an LGS to try out Magic, right? When I moved to Knoxville, I've since moved away from there, but when I first moved there and I didn't have anyone to play Magic with, I was like, all right, let's try out some LGSs. And I brought my Dragon deck. I was like, yeah, this is kind of dumb, fun, fair Magic that's, if you can call Eminence fair, that's just kind of chugging along slowly. And it was just, the upgraded pre-con, not doing anything super wild. And the first game I sat down to, I learned that there was a pack up for grab as the stakes of the game, right? Supplied by the LGS. And this guy whips out Urza Stacks, plays turn 1 Winter Orb. And the only impact I had in that game was when I played an island that I had altered. And the CEDH player goes, oh, can I see that? And I was like, sure. He's like, oh, that's really pretty. I was like, thanks. That was the only impact I had on that game. Otherwise, I could have just been a spectator. Kind of funny. So I walk away from that, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Go to another table and play against someone that is playing land destruction. And, turn 2, they blow up one of my 2 lands. I'm like, okay, that kind of sucks. Turn 3, they blow up another one of my lands. And similar story, I was somehow knocked out first despite only having a couple of lands. And I, left that table afterwards and I was like, man, this isn't very much fun. And then, ran into somebody that was like, oh, I don't play Commander, but I have an Oathbreaker deck. Remember Oathbreaker, everyone? But I had an Oathbreaker deck at the time and we played, and he was playing Narset Time Twister. And I, instantly lost my hand, sort of a thing, locked out of the game. Yeah, so, that might be a problem with this particular LGS, but, I see it a lot. I see it a lot where people are going into games with mismatched expectations, and if I did not love this game so freaking much, I might have walked away from that LGS and been like, man, I don't think I can have a fun time playing this game. But luckily, I ran into some people I have had a ton of fun experiences with. So enough about that. When is Commander fun? How do we make Commander fun? So it's fun when your deck does its thing, right? When your deck that you creatively brewed is getting to do exactly what you want it to do, and often some ways that surprise you. But again, this idea of fun is going to vary from person to person. So when else do you have fun? Do you have fun when you're winning? Do you have fun when you win this contest? Is that when you have the most fun? Do you have fun when you are just having table talk and social interactions, just like kind of chilling together, and winning the game aspect is not so important to you? Is everyone getting to play the game an important part of your fun? Important questions to ask. I have found the discourse surrounding this idea to involve, when someone says, I'm not having fun with my play group, or I played this deck and people are upset about it. The resounding answers are often like, just play your deck. Don't worry about what other people think. And the other one is, just talk with your playgroup about it. So, just building and playing what you like, I think is great for competitive 1v1 Magic. Like when you are in tournament and you're just playing to win and everybody has an idea of that, right? You're playing to win. Just playing your deck and not worrying about what other people think in Commander, though, is a great way to alienate yourself, right? To lead to unfun experiences for the table. If you're not listening to other people's complaints about your deck and not listening to the complaints about how they're not having fun, right? Because it's a social format, you need people to play with. So the second point then is just talk with your playgroup about it, right? And that can be really effective, but that can also be a difficult thing to navigate if you're anything like me. Not everyone is really comfortable or good at setting boundaries. And that's what it is, right? You're setting a boundary about spending time together and what that time together looks like, right? So that everyone has fun. So how do we set boundaries? I recently found this awesome formula that has been really helpful for me in my personal life. That's just when you're setting a boundary, you state what you value, then what you need in order for action to occur to fulfill that value. So for instance, say you value spending time with your friends and you value everyone getting to play their decks and participate in this game. And then this one player is playing mass land destruction and it is interfering with everyone being able to participate in the game. So you approach this player and you say, hey, I really love playing Magic with you, but I think I need to play against a different deck of yours to have fun playing with everyone, right? So you've stated that you value your time together. You need them to play a different deck or change something about their deck to have fun. And that's that action that needs to occur. They need to change their deck. So in order to have fun with Commander, you also need to know yourself, right? You need to know what you value, what you need to happen for that value to be met. That can be tricky, right? So when do you personally have fun in a game? Trickiest part is that not everyone's idea of fun is going to mesh. And that's normal and fine, that's valid. You just got to find your people. You got to find your people and play with them. So how do we find what's fun for you? We've already talked about approaching the game as a social activity or as a contest, and I have friends that are all across the spectrum, right, which are totally into competing and just cutthroat Magic. And then I also have friends that winning is the last thing on their mind, right? And if you're anything like me, I'm somewhere in the middle, right? Where it's like I enjoy winning, but I also, at the end of the day, am playing this game because I love being with my friends. And if I don't win, that's fine. But that's a fluid experience, right? It can change a lot depending on who you're playing the game with. So sometimes I feel more competitive, other times I don't care at all. So that's something to know about yourself as well. Like, what things are you looking for out of the game in context with what people you're playing with? Some things to think about that might help you pin down your idea of fun are, what power level do you want to play at, right? And a related question is, what kind of money are you comfortable spending on this game? Because you can spend a whole lot of money on this game, right? And, money is not always equivalent to power in Magic, right? So it's not like I spend $100 on this card and as soon as I play it, I'm going to win. There is a connection there often though, right? Where you look at CEDH and none of the decks are cheap, right? None of the decks are cheap, but you can play a $5,000 pile that is just a janky mess. Shout out to my friend Cole, who brewed Money Tribal on Cockatrice, and it's just like a very expensive deck that did basically nothing. It's pretty funny. Yeah, so you got to watch out for the arms race in your play group where somebody starts investing a little bit more money and it ups the power level of their deck, and then to keep up, everybody else starts investing money. You don't have to participate in that. You can brew very powerful decks on a budget. Check out Mitch from Commander's Quarters. He has very, very powerful low-budget decks, right? So if that's something you value a lot, is participating in this contest and winning your fair share of games, that can be a way to deal with that. So yeah, another idea to consider is, how long do you want your games to be? How long is your ideal game? So that might involve the number of turns of the game, not always, right? You can have a 20-turn game, but if the turns are going by really fast, doesn't matter so much. But just how long do you want to spend on a game of Magic? 30 minutes to an hour, hour to 2 hours plus, whatever. And it can be hard to pin that down. So, you might discuss that before and after with your play group. Be like, oh, we wanted this to be a fast game, but that didn't end up shaking out. I wonder what we can change. Yeah. Also, sometimes you play with people that take a long time on each of their turns, and that's fine, right? It's cool to think about this really complex game. Sometimes if that's really impacting your enjoyment of the game, right? Because that can kind of be like playing against a stacks player, a similar effect, right? Where one person is taking a really long turn. So might have to have a conversation there. And inevitably, when we talk about power level, there's this discussion about infinite combos, right? Commander is a completely broken format where there's just infinite combos that happen all the time and can happen incidentally, where it's just like, oh, oops, I went infinite. But there's a very wide range of infinites. There's a card that goes infinite with your commander. So that is very different. I'm talking like Niv Mizzet Peyrun with Curiosity. And yes, I did have that deck, and yes, I disassembled it after one game with it. I was like, oh, this is going to be so awesome. And then I was like, wow, that's not as much fun as I was expecting. And then earlier this week, I played my beloved Osgir deck, Osgir Mere Tribal. And it was like I assembled a 8-card infinite with my, Mana Mirror, infinite mana and all that good stuff. and it was like on turn like 12 or 13 or something, and everyone was cool with that. The game needed to end, and it was a very silly combo. So, fun stuff. But good to have discussions about, right? Because some people are just really not into infinites. They really mess with their fun. So it's good to respect that. Another thing that comes up a lot is politics. So are you the kind of player that really enjoys politics? Are you really into that kind of social part of the game? Are you someone that those social negotiations are very uncomfortable for, right? Do you want to set that expectation that it's like, hey, I'm not really comfortable with politics or participating in politics. Maybe that's cool for you and other people at the table, but leave me out of it. Or it's like, no politics, please. I just really don't like politics. Good thing to discuss. Yeah, figure out what play styles are your favorite to pilot, what play styles are your favorite to play against. I've found that when you tell someone, I really love playing against that deck, they take that as a compliment, right? It's like, oh, I built this fun deck and I enjoy playing this deck. Cool, everybody wins. So that's great. Are you interested only in the interactions on your board, or are you more interested in the interactions across the whole board? Just something that people vary on that is good to be aware of for yourself. Something I find I think about in most games is, I have this piece of removal and I'm like, this is the optimal play, but this other card creates the best story, right? And I usually pull the trigger on the best story card. Yeah, it's just like, you remember those games better than, removing someone's commander for the third time. Yeah, but I mean, both play styles are valid. And, sometimes I absolutely make the optimal play and deal with those repercussions in future games. And I guess a final point is, how reliant do you want your deck to be on your commander, right? So Voltron deck, and I stayed away from Voltron decks for the longest time because I was like, if my commander gets removed, that's it. And that's not fun. It's just like, get kind of pushed out of the game that way. And then I started playing Arena a bunch and started building these really janky things with, my free-to-play collection. And, oh my gosh, Cherix, the Raging Isle or whatever. Not Raging Isle, Raging something or other. Raging Crab, big old crab, 017. I started playing that deck, and it's just like this big, dumb, blue monster deck, and it was so much fun. And I just built it to be resilient to removal, and I was like, oh, this actually creates some really interesting choices. So I've started building some Voltron decks recently and been enjoying them. So just some final thoughts for this whole conversation. In my opinion, the question of fun commander is one of the most important questions in all of Magic, right? And it's discussed all the time. It's discussed everywhere, and it's discussed a lot. And I brought up the power levels earlier, right? And the command zone really came up with those, and they can be really useful, but they're not the whole picture. And it can be really hard to find balanced decks, right? It can be really hard to balance the power level of your play group. So the professor of Tolarian Community College recently posted this video called "It's Time to Move On from Power Levels." It gives a list of questions to ask before and after a game, and I found that to be really cool. It really helps everyone participate in the game and have fun. And it's funny, when I was making notes for this episode, I listened to that episode again, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, a lot of similar ideas. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't. And then finally, I just wanted to bring up the Fairy Conclave, this podcast that's a sort of sibling podcast of this one, created by my good friends Alec and Jerem. They just had their 1-year anniversary a little while back, and they really inspired me to start this whole thing, so I just need to give them a big shout out. And they have a segment where they shout out other content creators in the community, so I figured I'd start doing that as well. It's just a nice thing for the community, so here I am shouting out the Fairy Conclave. Check them out. And then finally, all of our social media for Lost with Fblthp is in the description of this episode. So, Instagram and Twitter and the likes. But I would really recommend checking out our Discord. We would love to have some cool conversations with you about whatever decks you're playing, cool things you've done, anything about Magic, really. It would just be fun to have you. And finally, if you enjoy the theme song to this show, you can check me out on SoundCloud at Softboylite, SOFFBOILITE. That's also my Twitter handle. Anyway, thanks so much for being here, and don't forget to tap out when you need to.